Imagine a world ravaged by war and tyranny, where every nation fears the encroaching shadow of a single, all-devouring evil, a restless, hateful superpower which conquers all that it sets its sights upon. It is a dark empire. Legions upon legions of warriors in glittering black armor, whose masks bear the bestial likenesses of wolves, rats, pigs, serpents, and insects, hiding the inhuman fury that burns within their eyes. They are soldiers of an ancient demigod made king, whose only desire is to corrupt and destroy. They know not the meaning of the words mercy or compassion, for their very culture, nay, their very species, discarded such sentiments long ago. At the source of their deplorable empire is a secluded island kingdom, where their twisted, sprawling cities are ever resounding with screams of agony and peals of wicked laughter. Here decadent nobles drink malt wine from the skulls of the dead, exact pain and humiliation on their fellow men for their perverted whimsy, and daily sacrifice lives by the score in devilish rituals best left indescribable. In this dark land, if one is not born into one of the noble houses, his life is a fragile, meaningless thing. If one is lucky and is not made a human sacrifice upon birth, he may live out his tragically short life as his master's litter carrier, cupbearer, or perhaps as a living footstool. If one is born a woman, well, there is no shortage of seraglios or blood-stained pleasure houses here. This land, this dark empire, has been known by many names. But in the days of old, before the 1,000 years of cataclysm known as the Tragic Millennium, it was known by only one name: England. Hello there, fellow travelers. I'm Tim from Secret Fire Books, and this is Michael Moorcock's HAWKMOON series, otherwise known as The History of the Runestaff. Let's check it out. The Runestaff series, or HAWKMOON series, whatever you want to call it, is a 4-volume series that takes place in Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion multiverse. And for those who don't know, Michael Moorcock invented his own interconnected multiverse that sort of connects all of his science fiction and fantasy stories, and they all center on one particular theme: the struggle between the forces of law and chaos. And in the middle of this struggle is a character known as the Eternal Champion. The Eternal Champion is a character that has different incarnations across the different universes and timelines of the multiverse. And it is essentially a representation of the will of the universe, and is there to sort of balance the scales between law and chaos. So whether this character is aligned with law or chaos, it doesn't really matter, because whatever universe it finds itself incarnated in, it will be fighting for whatever side is in peril. So if the character lives in a world where there's an abundance of chaos, it will be fighting on the side of law. And if it's in a world where there's an abundance of strict law and order, it will be fighting for the forces of chaos. So it's kind of this interesting duality that goes on in the Michael Moorcock multiverse. And this series is just one of the many series that takes place in the multiverse. The main character is an aspect of the Eternal Warrior. His name is Dorian HAWKMOON von Koln. He is a German nobleman who lives in this very, very dark era. This world that he lives in is, like I said in the intro, this distant future version of our world, where after 1,000 years of cataclysm that really aren't explained, it's just told that there was this cataclysm that lasted 1,000 years. After all that happens, the British Empire is really the only superpower that's left standing after all of this has happened, and they gradually become, over the course of hundreds of years, this powerful entity known as the Dark Empire, or the Empire of Grand Britain. The Grand Britannian Empire is this incredibly dangerous, incredibly powerful force that has extended its influence all across the globe and just kind of conquers whatever it touches. It has legions and legions of soldiers that just overcome any opposition. They conquer everything in sight, and our character Dorian happens to find himself in the position of defending his homeland, which is unfortunately overrun with Grand Britannian soldiers, and he finds himself captured and made a slave by the Grand Britannian Empire. Now, in this dark, dismal future, most cultures have this very basic medieval level of technology, but the Grand Britannians have managed to retain some advanced technology from before the Tragic Millennium, and also have access to some alien technology, or at least it's assumed to be alien technology. And they put that to great use in their world-conquering efforts. And seeing that Dorian HAWKMOON is this influential guy, he's a very charismatic guy, and he's also a very powerful warrior, the Emperor of Grand Britain decides to use him as a double agent. And he has his scientists embed in Dorian's head a super advanced, implied to be alien bit of technology called the Black Stone. They embed it into his head, and with it they can see and hear everything that goes on around Dorian. They can keep tabs on him wherever he goes. And if he fails in the mission that they give him, or, he just goes against their direct orders, they'll hit a kill switch and the machine will dissolve his brain from the inside out. So he really has no choice but to obey these guys. The Empire then sends HAWKMOON to a place called Castle Brass, which is in a region of southern France that has still managed to resist the Grand Britannian influence. And in fact, the leader of Castle Brass, a man named Count Brass, has actually been giving everyone in the Grand Britannian Empire a bit of trouble. And in fact, his daughter Yiselda offended one of the Grand Britannian generals, a man named Baron Meliodas, who has sworn revenge against Castle Brass and all that live there. So he sort of influences the Emperor to send Dorian HAWKMOON on this dangerous sleeper agent, double agent kind of mission to infiltrate Castle Brass and have them turned over to the Grand Britannian Empire. But wouldn't you know it, HAWKMOON is such a good guy. He befriends the people at Castle Brass. He falls in love with Count Brass's daughter, Yiselda. And thankfully, the people at Castle Brass aren't that stupid. They actually figure out pretty quickly that HAWKMOON is, under Imperial conditioning, and he's been forced to come here against his will to spy on them and turn them over to the Empire. So they're able to find a way to get him out of his conditioning and to deactivate the Black Stone in his forehead so that the Grand Britannian Empire can't keep tabs on him and they won't be able to kill him with it. And so now that he has this newfound freedom, HAWKMOON decides to repay his new friends by fighting for their cause, fighting for Castle Brass and the surrounding country. And the rest of the story is various adventures that HAWKMOON and his friends go on as they fight back against the Grand Britannian Empire. What's really, really cool about this series, more so than in any other Moorcock fantasy series that I've read, is that the world-building skills of the author are on full display here. The world-building is really, really good in this series. The sort of backdrop of the Dark Empire of Grand Britain is something that's really interesting and really fun to read about. It's incredibly dark and creepy and kind of disturbing, but it's still a lot of fun. The people of Grand Britain are incredibly evil and amoral. They've kind of transcended morality in a way, or at least they think they have. They are almost comically evil, and I say almost because there's some pretty serious, heinous stuff that they get up to in the series, but they're pushing it. They're pushing it towards the comically evil side, and because they are just completely amoral, they enjoy being evil and they are irrepentant about it. They have absolutely no mercy whatsoever, and so it's just fun in a way to read about this almost comically evil empire slowly taking over the world, and everyone else has this medieval level of technology, so they're going up against people on horseback with, steel armor, wielding axes and swords and spears, and here come the Grand Britannians in their giant mechanized war machines and their ornithopters with these laser cannons. It's some real Warhammer 40K kind of stuff, and it's just a lot of fun to read about. So within the Empire, there is this sort of caste system. I say it's a caste system, but there's really only two castes. There's the slaves and the nobles. If you're not a noble, you are just a slave. Best case scenario, you're a house servant. You wait around on your master all day in his mansion. You do some menial labor for him. Worst case scenario, you're probably a human guinea pig in one of the laboratories, and the Imperial scientists are going to perform some pretty awful, disturbing science experiments on you, sometimes for their own pleasure. Within the noble caste, there is various chivalric orders, and each chivalric order is represented by an animal. Now, in the culture of the Grand Britannian Empire, they never really describe why it is this way, but everyone wears a mask. They wear masks at all times, and depending on what order you are a part of, that determines what kind of mask you wear. So if you are a part of the Order of the Wolf, then you are a warrior and you wear a wolf mask. If you're part of the Order of the Serpent, then you wear a snake mask and you're one of the Imperial scientists. If you are part of the Order of the Mantis, then you are one of the Imperial Guards. You wear this big bug-eyed mantis helmet and you stand around the Emperor's throne all day and you protect him. Speaking of the Emperor, I think my favorite thing about the Grand Britannian Empire is the Emperor himself. The Emperor is this guy named King Huan, who is virtually immortal. He's hundreds and hundreds of years old. He's been around since the Empire was around, basically. He's the Empire itself, almost. And Moorcock describes him as this sort of mutated, undead, fetus-like creature that is just in this constant state of suspension in this big tank, this big globe-shaped tank that's attached to a giant life support machine that's made into a throne. And he doesn't do anything all day. He just sits in this tank on this throne, in the middle of this throne room, surrounded by his subjects who worship him like a god. And it's heavily implied that the people of Grand Britain have to sacrifice numerous human lives every day to sort of feed their life energy into this throne and keep the Emperor alive. Gosh, I wonder where I've heard of that concept before. You heard me, GW. We know what you did. But in all seriousness, I just really like the world building of this series. There is a sequel series called Count Brass or Castle Brass. I think it goes by either or. But there is a sequel series, and so I finally get around to reading that series. I'm going to be really excited to see where the world is and how the world building has changed since the original series. Now, I've made it very clear in several of my other videos that pacing is very important to me, especially when it comes to fantasy and sword and sorcery. I can enjoy a slow burn of a story, but there needs to be a reason that it's a slow burn. If I'm waiting around for long periods of time, waiting for the action to get going, there needs to be a reason for it. I really hate when a story is wasting my time, or at least when I feel like a story is wasting my time. HAWKMOON does not waste your time. Almost from page 1 of book 1, the story just takes off. It sets up the background and the factions at play very quickly, and then it just gets the ball rolling, and it doesn't really stop until the end of the series. And that is a strength, I believe. These are, very short books. They're very short, very punchy. The longest one is the first one. It's like 200 pages, and the rest are like a little more than 150. I think the last one, the Rune Staff, is only like 140 or something like that. But they're quick, they're pulpy. It's classic sword and sorcery. That's what it's supposed to be. If you read a lot of epic fantasy and epic sci-fi, and you read through these really long series with these massive door-stopper tomes, like let's see here, like Name of the Wind. Once you finish one of those and you need a breather, this is the kind of stuff you should be reading. Nice, pulpy sword and sorcery. That is a big advantage to these books, but I do think it can be a detriment as well, and you definitely see that with this series as well. The pacing is really breakneck, and I think that even though Moorcock had a really good idea going when he came up with the setting and the Grand Britannian Empire and HAWKMOON's struggle against them and whatever, I think that he had that great idea and put it into book 1, and then afterward, everything he wrote afterward was just, he was, running dry on inspiration. He blew it with all the ideas in the first book, and everything after that just kind of loses steam. Something that really got on my nerves as the series goes on is there is a lot of reliance on the Deus Ex Machina trope, where HAWKMOON and his friends will be in this desperate situation, they'll be cornered, or they'll be trapped, or they'll be captured by their enemies, and it seems like, that's the end for them, they can't possibly get out of this scenario, and then something just pops up. Something just happens. A character will show up out of nowhere, or there will be a magic item, or some kind of mystical power, or something, but something will just show up and help them out, and they just get out of the situation, and they go on their merry way, and then the formula starts over again from there. The way you can describe this series very quickly is, and then this happened, because that's what happens basically nonstop after book 1. This happens, and then this happens, and then that happens, then that happens, and so on and so forth. It's just this string of things happening, and all this, point A to point B. Oh, we're at point B, but there's this roadblock. Oh, something showed up to help us out. Now we're past that. Now we're going to move on to point C, so on and so forth. It gets very formulaic and very tiring after a while. There's some really cool concepts that are at work here. Michael Moorcock is fantastic when it comes to coming up with really unique, fantasy scenarios and ideas and making them feel authentic, even if they're, kind of riding on the rule of cool, and you kind of just shrug your shoulders and say, it's fantasy, I can roll with it. He's really good at that, but it felt like he really did run out of steam very quickly with the HAWKMOON series. The thing is, I think I could handle all of the very linear storylines and sort of contrived Deus Ex Machina plot elements if it weren't for the fact that our main character is just really not that interesting at all. Dorian HAWKMOON is just not an interesting protagonist. He's just not. And that's really disappointing for me because I've read 2 other Michael Moorcock fantasy series, and his heroes are very interesting. We have the Elric saga where, Elric is this dark anti-hero who tries to do good, he tries to be a decent person, but he constantly puts himself in scenarios where he can't. He carries around this evil demonic sword that drinks people's souls, so that's not good for him to have around. There's also the Corum series, in which the main character, Corum Jalen Hearsay, is this inhuman character. There are humans in this world he lives in, but he himself is not a human. He's part of this ancient race that is sort of dying out, and the whole story is kind of based around his loss of innocence. He's this very noble character, but all these horrible, tragic things keep happening to him, but he keeps picking himself up and facing the world again and again. And part of the real joy of this series is rooting for him, even though the world is chipping away at him, and he's gradually losing his innocence over time. But you don't get any of that with Dorian HAWKMOON, unfortunately. There has always been this theme of not just law versus chaos, but free will versus destiny. One's individual choices versus the whims of fate. And it's something that's brought up in both those series that I talked about, but also in HAWKMOON. But unfortunately, HAWKMOON just doesn't handle it very well. HAWKMOON is a character who's constantly talking about how he's his own man, he's his own master, he's the master of his own destiny, he can make his own choices. But he can't really prove it because the plot just kind of keeps stringing him along. You feel like he's trying to get from point A around point B and, to point F or point E or somewhere else. But the story just keeps saying, no, you're going to go in a straight line from point A to point B and you're going to like it. And he just doesn't feel like he has a lot of agency. In the later books, they keep talking about the will of the rune staff, and we don't really figure out what the rune staff is. It's a staff, it has magical powers, it can inspire people. We're not really told anything else about it, and apparently it influences people's fate and destinies, and so that's what's kind of stringing HAWKMOON along, and by the end of it, we don't really figure out what it's all about. And so, unfortunately, we have this series where, unlike Moorcock's other fantasy heroes, the hero of our story just isn't all that interesting at all, which was really disappointing to me. But then again, this series was one of Moorcock's older series. He wrote these back in the day. He was very young when he first started the HAWKMOON series, so I can definitely see that he has matured quite a bit in his writing style since then. I know it sounds like I'm really hating on this series, but I'm not hating on it. I really enjoyed a lot about these books. I really love Book 1. Jewel in the Skull, I think, is a really fantastic sword and sorcery novel with some really cool, dark SF elements thrown in there. It's the rest of the series, it's books 2 through 4 that I think kind of fell flat for me. And ultimately, I think that might just be me, raising my standards a little too high. Like I said, I read the Elric Saga and the Corum series before this, so getting into HAWKMOON and, figuring out this series that Michael Moorcock wrote when he was very young and a lot more inexperienced as an author. I kind of set the bar too high. I had my expectations way up, and I guess HAWKMOON just couldn't fulfill those expectations, at least not past Book 1. But if you've never read any of Michael Moorcock's stories, I would recommend these if you're looking for some cool, dark SF elements. Like I said, just keep in mind that after Book 1, it really goes downhill. But I would honestly recommend the Elric Saga or definitely the Corum series. In fact, I think everyone should start the Eternal Champion multiverse with Corum, because it's some really creative stuff, even though the storyline's very linear. But ultimately, that's just my opinion. Please let me know in the comments. Have you read these books? What did you think of them? And until next time, guys, farewell, reject modernity, embrace sword and sorcery, and of course, keep reading.
And check out Sand and Steel, available now on Amazon.com and SecretFireBooks.com. It's short, it's pulpy, and it's bloody as HE double hockey sticks. Reject modernity. Embrace sword and sorcery. Get your copy today.